Toxic sister-in-law stalked me and falsely accused me of cheating, nearly ruining my new marriage. Now she's shocked that we're cutting her out of the will while she plays the victim. Asterisk asterisk. I, 29F, recently got married to Finn, 30M, in a grand ceremony. It's been 1 month into our marriage, and our life was going great until crazy Sil decided to interfere in our lives and ruin everything. For context, Finn has a younger sister named Deborah, 28F, who is a divorcee. I get along really well with his parents, but have always had a rocky relationship with his sister. She is incredibly negative, manipulative, and toxic. I have worked hard for years. My partner and I have been together for 8.5 years to avoid getting on her bad side. She constantly talks bad about other people, complaining about my in-laws nonstop. They're not perfect, but they're not evil or abusive. She spends all her time talking about how crappy her life is, how this or that isn't going to work out, how some boss or ex-friend really screwed her over and now she doesn't talk to them anymore. Or she claims that's why she had to quit her job. Over the years, I've recognized the patterns that scream she rarely accepts any responsibility for conflict, and she's constantly trying to recruit people to her side to see her as a victim. 6 months ago, we found out that Deborah's marriage was falling apart because of her gambling problem. This was a shocker because no one had any idea that she was into gambling. Apparently, she had cleverly hidden it from everyone and used her ex-husband's money to secretly pay off what she owed. However, he eventually found out as thousands of dollars kept going missing and confronted her about it. When the secret came out, he tried to get her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. Eventually, he had no choice but to divorce her. Since then, things only got worse. She became unbearable to be around, and her addiction was taking a toll on her personality. The divorce didn't just make her change, it made her even more difficult to deal with, casting a dark cloud over any chance of her getting better. I have always done my best to stay neutral and supportive whenever I'm around her, as I don't want her to find a reason to get upset with me. She lives across the country from us, so we usually only saw her once or twice a year anyway. Unfortunately, as soon as Finn and I got engaged, Deborah flipped a switch with me. It started with her storming off when we announced our engagement during Christmas last year. Later, she apologized and told us that our engagement announcement had made her feel bad about her past failed relationships. Despite her initial reluctance, she accepted my invitation to be a bridesmaid at our wedding, giving the impression that she was supportive, despite the underlying tensions. Despite this, she went from being friendly to gradually ignoring me anytime she saw me. For some reason, she remained involved with all the wedding activities, like when I went dress shopping and had my bridal shower. She criticized everything about the wedding, every step of the way, out loud. My future mother-in-law and fiancé both called her out on her behavior, but it didn't help. I confronted her about this gently. I don't do well with conflict, and asked if I had done anything wrong. She denied anything was wrong and brushed me off. Just before our wedding, my in-laws decided to take us all out on a family vacation. I was a bit nervous about spending multiple days around my sister-in-law as she had started to become a headache for me. As expected, during the vacation, she was in an especially bad mood. She lashed out at everyone, weirdly demanding that we rearrange the furniture in the Airbnb we were all staying in because she didn't like the way it was arranged. Her parents and my partner sometimes enabled this kind of irrational behavior as they were afraid of her anger issues, and they basically did whatever she asked for in the hope that she would shut up. I was starting to get a little tired of her behavior after a few days and was trying to just keep to myself, avoiding her wrath. Unfortunately, she seemed to notice this. When I tried to politely decline some unsolicited advice she was offering me related to my work that I hadn't asked for, she started accusing me of snapping at her. My lord, would it have felt good to actually do that after all these years? She then tried to call me out in front of her whole family. I firmly informed her that I am an expert in my field, which is why I have a high-paying job, and thus I was never seeking her advice. Her audacity surprised me, especially considering she had no idea about my line of work yet decided to meddle in my business. She basically spent the entire rest of the trip trying to get me to talk to her about how I had snapped at her. My partner told me that whenever I went to bed, she would sit with my mother-in-law and him and talk about how she didn't know what was wrong with me. She would force them to listen and tell them that I was always condescending to her, treating her like she was stupid. My partner tried to explain my point of view, but she instantly dismissed it and accused him of having changed after getting engaged to me. When our vacation ended, I was glad I wouldn't have to see her around. I decided to not think much about the incident and got busy with my upcoming wedding preparations. But unfortunately, Deborah had decided to extend her stay. She spent her time making up stories and spreading false rumors about me to my fiancé's relatives. I wouldn't have minded as much until one of his cousins called to confirm a crazy rumor she had spread about me, saying that I was not taking care of my fiancé and that he was very unhappy with me. My fiancé assured his cousin that this was completely false and that he was quite happy in our relationship. It was clear that Deborah was trying to manipulate people into thinking that I was a bad person.
Finn and I talked about this.
He expressed his frustration with Deborah's manipulative actions and acknowledged that her behavior had crossed a line, tarnishing our relationship in the eyes of his family. I decided that I didn't want this kind of negativity around me, especially on the day of our marriage. I invited my in-laws and sister-in-law out for lunch, so we could have an open discussion about this. My fiancé couldn't be with me during this discussion, as he had an important work trip. During lunch, I laid my opinion out on the table and firmly told SlL that if she continued to say bad things about me, she would not be invited to my wedding. Hearing this, Deborah started yelling at me that I had no right to talk to her this way. My mother-in-law asked her to quiet down, but Deborah continued to yell that I was just a poor girl who had gotten the chance to marry her rich brother, so I should talk to her with more respect. I looked at her blankly as she accused me of trying to steal her brother for his money and that I was nothing more than a gold digger. My mother-in-law stepped in at this point, loudly telling Deborah to shut up and reprimanding her for speaking to me that way. My father-in-law also looked pissed and started apologizing to me for her behavior. Deborah tried to argue, claiming that I was attempting to steal from their family inheritance. I interjected to remind Deborah that I was quite financially independent and hailed from an affluent family myself. While we might not be as wealthy as my fiancé's family, it didn't mean we didn't lead a comfortable life. I pointed out to her that her condescension stemmed mostly from the fact that we were immigrants, which, in her eyes, somehow implied we were less well off than them. Deborah's eyes widened, and she started to stutter, not knowing what to say. I firmly reminded her that this was her last chance to change, and if she continued down this path, both my fiancé and I would uninvite her from the wedding. She looked pissed, but there was nothing more she could say. I would feel if my husband ever cheated on me. The question took me by surprise, and I tried to keep my composure, but inside I was seething. Before I could even respond, she continued, saying that she would never tolerate a cheating partner and that she couldn't imagine being married to someone who would cheat. The insinuation was so ridiculous, and I felt my heart race as the anger began to bubble up. Finn noticed my discomfort and shot Deborah a confused look. "What's this about?" he asked, clearly not understanding where she was coming from. Deborah, though, wasn't backing down. "Well, I just wanted to know how someone like you, who married so quickly, would react if something like that happened," she said, not even trying to hide her hostility. Her eyes glinted with a kind of satisfaction, as though she was hoping to provoke me into a reaction. I stared at her, trying to hold back the words that were itching to come out. I wanted to tell her that she had no right to ask such an invasive and offensive question, especially considering her own disastrous marriage and current life choices. Instead, I took a deep breath and calmly said, "I trust my husband, and that's the most important thing in any marriage." Her expression faltered for just a moment, but then she scoffed and tried to cover it up with a sarcastic laugh. "Well, that's your choice," she said. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The rest of the dinner passed in an awkward silence. I could feel the tension thick in the air, and I couldn't help but think about how much I was dreading seeing her again. Deborah had managed to make yet another meal feel like an uncomfortable battlefield. I knew I had to do something about her constant manipulation, but I also knew that confronting her again would only escalate the situation. For now, I kept my thoughts to myself and focused on enjoying the evening with Finn, even though I could tell that his mind was preoccupied with what had just transpired. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Finn turned to me with a serious expression. "I'm so sorry about everything with Deborah," he said. "I don't know what's gotten into her lately. It's like she's trying to sabotage everything." I nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know what her problem is either," I replied, my voice heavy with frustration. "It's like she's never happy unless she's stirring up drama. I'm really trying to keep the peace, but I don't know how much longer I can take it." Finn reached out and pulled me into an embrace. "You don't have to put up with her. We're a team, and we'll figure this out together," he said, his words comforting me, but a part of me still felt uneasy about what might come next. The following day, as we were talking about our plans for the future and settling into married life, Finn surprised me with something I wasn't expecting. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone serious. "I want us to start fresh, with no more negativity from anyone, especially from my sister. I'm going to talk to my parents and see what we can do to ensure that Deborah's behavior doesn't continue to impact our lives." I was taken aback by his words, not expecting him to take such a strong stance. "You think we should cut her out of our lives?" I asked, uncertain. "I think we need to set boundaries," Finn said firmly. "If she's going to keep acting like this, it's not just affecting you and me. It's affecting our marriage, and I won't let her destroy what we've worked so hard for." His determination made me feel a little better, but I couldn't help but wonder how this would play out. I knew that setting boundaries with Deborah wouldn't be easy, but if this was the only way to protect our marriage and our peace of mind, then maybe it was the right decision. The thought of going forward without her constant interference was both liberating and terrifying at the same time. As we continued to discuss what steps to take, I realized that I was tired of being the silent one in the background, allowing Deborah to manipulate everyone around her. It was time for us to take control of our lives and our relationship. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that the only way to move forward was to leave behind the toxicity and let go of the people who weren't supportive of our happiness. The next week, Finn sat down with his parents to have a heart-to-heart conversation about Deborah. He told them everything, from the constant negativity to her manipulative actions, and how it was damaging not only our marriage, but the entire family dynamic. His parents, though initially hesitant, agreed that something had to be done. They made the difficult decision to exclude Deborah from their will, realizing that her gambling addiction and reckless behavior had put their entire family's financial security at risk. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one that needed to be made to protect everyone involved. As we discussed the next steps, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were in control of our own future. Deborah may have tried to destroy our marriage, but in the end, it was us who had the final say. In the months that followed, things began to settle down. Deborah continued to spiral, but she no longer had the power to interfere in our lives. Our relationship grew stronger, and Finn and I built a future together, without the constant threat of her toxicity hanging over us. Looking back, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the strength we found in each other. Despite the challenges, we had weathered the storm, and our marriage was stronger than ever. As for Deborah, I realized that some people would never change, no matter how much you tried to help them. All we could do was protect ourselves and move forward, leaving the toxic people behind.